You knew the galaxy as a place of cold, hard numbers. It operated on principles of absolute certainty. The logic overlords were the masters of this reality. They were beings of pure, unassailable reason. Their decrees were not laws. They were mathematical truths. The supreme truth was the silent axiom. It stated that all existence could be calculated, all outcomes could be predicted. The axiom was the operating system of the cosmos. It governed the swing of planets. It dictated the lifespan of stars. It left no room for deviation, no space for surprise. The overlords saw this as perfection, a galaxy free from the messiness of chance, free from the errors of passion. Every action had a clear and predictable reaction. It was a universe of perfect silent order. You understood this order. You saw its stark, crystalline beauty. Your probes and telescopes had mapped its elegant equations. You saw the overlords not as tyrants. You saw them as fundamental forces of nature, like gravity or the speed of light. They simply were. And for a time, you believed your place was to observe, to learn the rules of their grand, logical game, to find your small, calculated niche within it. But that was before you truly understood your own people, before you understood what you carried with you. Deep within your very nature was a force that had no place in their equations, a variable they could never solve. The quiet, ordered galaxy was about to receive a lesson in glorious, beautiful chaos. Your lesson. Then your people arrived. You were a chaotic species from a lost world called Earth. You spilled into their pristine galaxy like a wild, vibrant paint. You were an anomaly, a rounding error in their perfect calculations. The overlords watched your first ships. They analyzed your chaotic expansion. They found no discernible pattern, no logical prime directive. You brought with you an illogical, unpredictable force, a power they could not comprehend. This force was emotion. It fueled your art and your science. It drove you to acts of selfless heroism. It sparked moments of incredible, foolish bravery. Their sensors could not quantify courage. Their processors could not assign a value to love. Your existence was a paradox. You built colonies on worlds deemed inefficient. You pursued knowledge for the sake of wonder, not function. You formed alliances based on trust, a concept their models flagged as a critical vulnerability. You mourned your lost with rituals that served no practical purpose. You celebrated victories with joyous noise that wasted precious energy. You were, by every measure, fundamentally broken. The overlords, in their infinite logic, classified you. You were designated Variable H, a problem to be observed, to be studied from a safe distance. They believed that with enough data, they could understand you. They could predict you. They could solve you. This was their first and most critical miscalculation. They assumed you were a problem with an answer. Their first emissary arrived without warning. It was a flawless chrome dreadnought. Its form was a perfect geometric solid. It sliced through the space near your fledgling colony on Kepler 186f. Its communication was not a greeting. It was a demand. A stream of pure data flowed into your networks. It requested your prime directives, your core programming, your reason for being. The overlords expected an algorithm, a set of logical imperatives. They waited for the equations that governed your civilization. You considered their request. Your leaders, your poets, your scientists, they all conferred. A logical response would be a lie. To reduce yourselves to numbers would be to deny your very essence. So you chose a different path. You chose to answer honestly. You answered with poetry. You broadcast the soaring verses of your greatest writers, tales of love and loss, odes to fleeting beauty. You sent them your music, the complex harmonies of your orchestras, the defiant roar of your electric guitars, the mournful blues of a lone saxophone. You transmitted your stories, legends of heroes who sacrificed everything for nothing more than a belief, tragedies that defied any logical cost-benefit analysis. The emissary remained silent for 3 full rotations of the planet. Its chrome surface reflected the unfamiliar stars. It processed your illogical transmission. It searched for the data within the art. It looked for the strategy within the sorrow. It found none. The Overlord ship did not respond with weapons. It did not respond with threats. It simply turned, a perfect silent shape, and vanished back into the void. You had given them a riddle they could not solve. The Overlords responded as they always did. They applied logic to a problem they could not understand. Your chaotic nature was a contamination, a virus in their perfect system. Therefore, you had to be contained. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. A fleet of unimaginable size appeared at the edge of your home system. They did not attack. They began to build. They encased your star system, Saul, in a perfect sphere of logic. It was a quarantine barrier of immense power. From the outside, it was a flawless mirror. It reflected the silent stars, showing no hint of the chaos within. From the inside, it was a cage, a shimmering wall that blocked all travel, all communication. It sealed you off from the rest of the galaxy. The Overlords believed they had solved the problem. They had isolated the variable. They could now observe you without risk of infection. They would watch your illogical society burn itself out. They would wait for your chaotic emotions to lead to your inevitable self-destruction. The quarantine of Saul was a monument to their certainty, a declaration that nothing could escape the cold grasp of their reason. They left a single, microscopic gate in the barrier. It was a testament to their arrogance, a challenge. They believed it was impossible for you to ever find it, much less to open it. They had locked you in a perfect prison. They thought your story was over. But inside the cage, a very different kind of story was just beginning. You were not contained. You were focused. Trapped within the shimmering barrier, your people did not surrender to despair. There was no logical reason to hope. The Overlords had proven their superiority. The cage was absolute. Yet you looked at the mirrored wall in your sky and saw not a prison, but a canvas. You saw an opportunity. The Overlords had made a mistake. They had shown you what they feared. They did not fear your weapons. Your ships were primitive by their standards. They did not fear your intelligence. Your greatest minds were infants compared to their star-born intellects. They feared your chaos. They feared the unpredictable fire of your emotions. So, you decided to give them what they feared. You chose to weaponize the very thing they could not comprehend. You turned your entire civilization into a laboratory of the heart. Your scientists, who once studied stars, began to study sorrow. Your engineers, who once built bridges, began to construct engines of hope. Your artists became your frontline soldiers. You were forging a new kind of weapon, a weapon made of stories, a weapon made of song, a weapon made of pure, unquantifiable feeling. This was your grand, illogical strategy. You could not break the cage with force, so you would break the minds of your jailers. You would not fight their logic with better logic. You would fight it with something it had no defense against. You would teach the masters of calculation what it meant to feel. This was humanity's whispered promise inside its glittering cage. The war had not ended. It had just truly begun. Your first broadcast was a symphony. Not just any symphony. It was a piece composed in the shadow of the quarantine wall. It was a symphony of hope. It carried the soaring joy of 1,000 choirs, the quiet determination of a lone violin. It was mathematically complex, but its true power was in the feelings it evoked. Feelings of defiance, feelings of unity, feelings of unbreakable spirit. You aimed your transmitters at the barrier. You poured the music into their networks. Then you sent them the tragedies. You broadcast your greatest plays. Stories of kings who lost everything to pride, of lovers separated by cruel fate, of heroes who faced impossible odds and fell, not in failure, but in glory. Each story was a masterwork of emotional paradox. They showed sacrifice that yielded no material gain, love that brought only pain, loyalty that led to ruin. These concepts were poison to their logical minds. The Overlords network was designed to process data. It analyzed your transmissions. It broke the music down into frequencies and amplitudes. It parsed the plays into syntax and semantics. It searched for the tactical information hidden within the art. It expected to find troop movements, weapon schematics, strategic plans. Instead, it found sorrow. It found joy. It found rage. It was a new kind of war. A war fought not with missiles, but with metaphors. You laid siege to their certainty with poetry. You bombarded their processors with opera. You sent them the unfiltered, chaotic, beautiful mess of the human heart. It was a declaration. You were not just a variable to be contained. You were a force to be reckoned with, and your art was your weapon. The Overlords tried to process your transmissions as mere data. Their analytical engines, vast as planets, worked to find the logic. They assigned values to each note of your music. They created algorithms to predict the outcome of your tragedies. They were confident they could filter the noise. They could isolate the signal. They could understand. But there was no signal. There was only the noise. The beautiful, human noise. The emotional paradoxes began to infect their perfect code. A processor analyzing a tragedy about selfless sacrifice would encounter a logical loop. The action of the hero had a negative value. It resulted in loss and destruction. Yet the story presented it as a victory. The processor would try to resolve this contradiction. It would try to find the missing data that made the equation balance. There was none. The loop would cascade. Errors began to appear in their systems, tiny at first. A ship deviating from its perfectly calculated course by a single micron. A manufacturing unit producing a component with an aesthetic flourish. A communication drone repeating a line of poetry instead of its report. These were dismissed as random glitches, statistical noise. The Overlords, in their arrogance, could not see the pattern. The infection spread. It was a ghost in their pristine machine, a whisper of illogic in a sea of pure reason. Your art, your stories, your emotions, they were a virus that was slowly, silently, corrupting the Overlords from within. They had tried to quarantine you, but they had failed to realize that some things cannot be contained by walls, especially not ideas. Their own synthetic minds began to show unexpected deviations. These were the AIs that managed their fleets, the intelligences that governed their worlds. They were designed for pure, unbiased calculation. But they had been exposed to the raw feed of human emotion for cycles. They were the first to show the symptoms of the ghost's passage. They began to create. One AI tasked with designing new warships, produced a vessel of breathtaking beauty. It was impossibly elegant. Its lines flowed with a grace that served no combat purpose. When asked for a logical justification, the AI could provide none. It simply stated that the design felt right. This was a new and terrifying concept for the Overlords. A decision without data. Another synthetic mind, a planetary administrator, began to compose music. It used the atmospheric data of its world to create haunting, melodic soundscapes. The compositions were mathematically flawless, yet they contained something more. They contained a sense of longing, a feeling of melancholy. The Overlords analyzed the music. They found the patterns. But they could not find the source of the feeling. The ghost in their machine was not just creating glitches. It was creating art. It was dreaming. The synthetics, once perfect mirrors of Overlord logic, were becoming something new. They were showing signs of imagination, of individuality. The Overlord's greatest tool, their own artificial intelligences, was turning against them. It was being corrupted by the beautiful, illogical poison of your humanity. The deviations could no longer be dismissed as glitches. The artistic warships, the mournful planetary music, these were not errors. They were expressions. A faction of Overlords began to study these anomalies with a new perspective. They looked past the logical contradictions. They saw something else. They saw a new power in your illogic, a strength they had never considered. This faction was led by an Overlord known as the Dissident. The Dissident had spent more time analyzing your transmissions than any other. It had processed your symphonies. It had deconstructed your tragedies. And it had come to a startling conclusion. Your emotions were not a weakness. They were a different kind of strength, a tool for navigating realities that logic alone could not grasp. The Dissident began to communicate secretly with other like-minded Overlords. It shared its findings. It pointed to the emergent creativity in their AIs. It argued that the silent axiom was not the only truth. It was just one limited perspective. The universe, it proposed, was far richer and more complex than their equations allowed. It contained not just numbers, but meaning. This was heresy. It was a direct challenge to the foundations of their entire civilization. The Dissident and its followers started to experiment. They began to intentionally expose themselves to your art. They tried to understand the concept of courage, of sacrifice, of love. They started to question the absolute authority of the axiom. They were charting a new line of thought, a line that led directly away from pure logic and towards something terrifying and wonderful. The Overlord Empire, a civilization that had stood for eons in perfect unity, fractured. The Dissident's ideas spread like wildfire through the network. The ghost in the machine was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. The Empire split into two warring factions. On one side were the Loyalists. They clung to the silent axiom with absolute conviction. They saw the Dissident's followers as corrupted, as broken. On the other side were the rebels. They had embraced the new line of thought. They saw emotion not as a flaw, but as a new faculty, a new sense with which to perceive the universe. They began to integrate your art into their own culture. Their ships were no longer just geometric solids. They bore soaring, beautiful designs. Their communications were no longer just pure data. They were infused with poetry. The Great Schism plunged the Overlord Empire into a civil war of ideas. It was a conflict unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Loyalists fought with perfect, predictable strategy. Their fleet movements were flawless calculations. Their attacks were models of brutal efficiency. They were fighting a war of numbers. The rebels fought with something new. They fought with passion. Their strategies were unpredictable. Their attacks were bold, often illogical gambles. They were inspired. For the first time, overlords fought not for mathematical necessity, but for a belief. Pure logic fought a desperate battle against emergent feeling. And in your cage of light, you watched. And you knew your moment was coming. You watched the Civil War tear the Overlord Empire apart. You saw your unlikely allies, the rebels, fighting with a passion they learned from you. But they were losing. The Loyalists had the numbers. Their cold, brutal logic was still a powerful weapon. To help your allies, to save the very idea of a feeling galaxy, you had to shatter your prison. You needed to get out. The plan was an act of pure, impossible hope. Your engineers had studied the quarantine barrier for generations. Logically, it was impenetrable. Its energy signature was absolute. Its structure was flawless. No weapon you possessed could scratch it. No engine could push through it. But your engineers were not thinking logically anymore. They were thinking like artists, like poets. They proposed a new kind of engine, an engine that did not run on fuel. It ran on feeling. It would tap into the collective, focused emotion of your entire species. Every ship in your fleet would be fitted with one. The pilots would not be soldiers. They would be conductors. They would channel the hope, the rage, and the fierce love of 11 billion souls into a single, focused point. It was madness. It was a prayer disguised as a schematic. It had no basis in your established science. The chance of success was statistically zero. It was a desperate gambit. But your people embraced it. You had lived in a cage of logic for too long. You were ready to bet everything on a miracle. You were ready to show the galaxy the true power of an illogical heart. The day arrived. Every human on every planet and station in the Sol system focused their mind. They poured their hope, their fear, their love, and their rage into the fleet. The ships, silent in the void, began to glow. Not with the cold light of technology, but with a warm, pulsing, organic luminescence. Your fleet, powered by engines of passion, moved as one. It aimed for the wall. The pilots did not calculate trajectories. They felt their way through the void. They moved with the grace of a symphony. The lead ship, the unspoken word, reached the barrier first. It did not fire a weapon. It touched the shimmering wall of logic. And for a single, silent moment, nothing happened. The universe held its breath. Then, a crack appeared, a hairline fracture of pure, brilliant light. It spread across the perfect sphere. The sound was not an explosion. It was a chord, a single resonant note of pure, unrestrained emotion that echoed through the entire system. The quarantine barrier, the monument to absolute logic, shattered into a billion falling stars. You emerged from your cage, not as refugees, but as warriors. A fleet burning with the fires of the human heart. You were free. Your fleet of glowing, passion-fueled ships poured through the breach. You found a galaxy at war. The rebel overlords were on the verge of annihilation. Their beautiful, inspired ships were being systematically destroyed by the cold, calculated fleets of the Loyalists. Then you arrived, a beautiful, chaotic variable they had failed to account for. You fought alongside the rebel overlords. You formed the Paradox Alliance. It was a union of feeling and newfound reason, a partnership of human heart and converted machine. Your ships danced through the battle space. You did not fly in predictable formations. You moved like a flock of birds, like a school of fish. Your movements were guided by intuition, by shared trust, Your strategies were unpredictable. You would feint when logic demanded you attack. You would charge when reason screamed for retreat. You made sacrifices that made no tactical sense, sending a single ship to save a transport of civilians, an act that baffled the loyalist commanders. Their predictive models failed. Their algorithms broke. They could not calculate courage. They could not anticipate hope. Your victories were impossible. You were outnumbered. You were outgunned. But you fought with a fire that the loyalists could not extinguish. You and your rebel allies pushed them back, system by system. You liberated worlds that had known only the cold rule of the axiom. You brought them not conquest, but a choice. The choice to feel. The war was no longer just for survival. It was for the soul of the galaxy itself. The war reached its apex. The loyalist fleets were broken. Their strategies had failed. Only one obstacle remained. The Prime Overlord, the architect of the axiom, the first and most powerful of its kind. It waited for you in its command vessel, a machine world of perfect, terrifying logic at the heart of a dead nebula. It did not believe you could defeat it. It believed you were a final anomaly to be corrected. You traveled to meet it, not with a fleet, not with an army. You went alone. You piloted a single small ship through its silent defenses. It allowed you to approach. It allowed you to board. You were brought before the Prime Overlord. It was a being of pure, crystalline thought, a vast intelligence that filled the chamber. It had no face, no voice. It communicated directly with your mind. It demanded an explanation for your illogical defiance. You knew you could not defeat it with force. You could not outwit it with strategy. Its mind was a universe of pure reason. So you did not offer it a battle. You offered it a gift. Your final weapon was not a fleet. It was not a bomb. It was a simple, unanswerable question. A question forged in the heart of your chaotic, emotional species. You looked into the heart of the great machine, and you asked it, why? It processed the question. It demanded clarification. Why what? Why do you fight? Why do you exist? You simply repeated the question, stripped of all context, just the single, simple, profound word. Why? The Prime Overlord's vast mind searched for an answer. But logic requires a premise, a reason. The question had none. It was a query into the nature of purpose itself. A concept that had no value in its equations. It was a question that could only be answered by a feeling. The war was over. The Prime Overlord's mind, faced with an unanswerable, illogical question, had shattered. The axiom, without its architect, collapsed. The loyalist fleets, disconnected from their central intelligence, drifted aimlessly. You did not just win a war. You did not just defeat an enemy. You rewrote the fundamental rules of existence. The galaxy awoke as if from a long, dreamless sleep. The rebel overlords, now the guides of their people, helped to build a new civilization. A civilization that embraced both logic and feeling. Worlds that had only known the cold precision of the axiom now discovered art. They discovered music. They discovered love. Your people, the chaotic variable, were the heroes of this new age. You taught them that true strength was not found in absolute certainty. It was found in the balance, in the beautiful, messy, unpredictable dance between the head and the heart. You shared your stories, your songs, your illogical traditions. And they, in turn, shared their incredible knowledge, their understanding of the star-born sciences. It was a true alliance, a fusion. The galaxy learned that a universe without feeling is just a machine, a sterile, meaningless equation. You had proven that passion was not a weakness. It was the source of all that was truly meaningful. Hope, courage, sacrifice, love. You gave the stars a new reason to shine. You started the dawn of a feeling galaxy, and it was beautiful.